Welcome back, everyone. We are now on video 5 for chapter 8. I would like to go over the marginal propensity to consume and save. This is very Keynesian. The word marginal is like saying additional. It's additional because we're speaking of disposable income, and disposable income is always considered additional income. Propensity is a predilection. Another way of saying is tendency down here to consume and save. So the additional tendency to consume and save. I had a student one time ask me, why didn't Keynes just say that? And I said, because he wanted to teach you prose and sophistication, because he was an extremely complex, beautiful brain. And so, of course, he really did write with such beautiful prose. If you ever get the opportunity to read some of his works, they're beautifully written. So marginal propensity to consume and save. There is marginal propensity to consume, period. And then there is marginal propensity to save, period. And this makes sense because we can either save or consume disposable income, the additional income that we have. MPC, marginal propensity to consume, is the change in consumption divided by the change in real disposable income. So here's a simple example. If consumption increases by 80 cents for each additional dollar, and we say additional dollar because we're speaking of disposable income, it's the money that you have left over after you have paid all your necessary bills. So if it's 80 cents for each additional dollar of income, the marginal propensity to consume is equal to 80 cents divided by a dollar. It's 0.8, right? 0.8 or 80%, because you multiply that by 100, you get the percentage. So here's a second example. First, out of 4 trillion, so in the beginning we have $4 trillion in disposable income. This is for a whole economy now. The consumption out of this 4 trillion is at 100%. We know that because the savings are 0. So if I was to go back to this slide here for a minute, remember this here? Imagine this is our 4 trillion. I wish sometimes I can write really quickly here. So at this point where the consumption and the real disposable income intersect, you have 4 trillion. But what happens if this economy is now making 5 trillion? Well, if this economy is making 5 trillion and it's not spending all of the 5 trillion, because if we go back here to this slide, we see now we have $5 trillion in disposable income, but we are consuming 4.75 trillion. We are consuming 75% out of the additional trillion. So you know how we said here is the change in consumption? So in other words, when we went from 4 to 5, the change is 1 trillion. Of that 1 trillion, 75% of it, 750 billion, is being consumed, which means 250 billion is being saved, because if you're not consuming it, you're saving it. If you're not saving it, you're consuming it. Those are the only two options. So how do we do this? It's really very simple. 750 is up here. The change in consumption is 750 billion. We know that because when we went from 4 trillion to 5 trillion, how much was consumed? 4.75. So that means 75% or 750 billion of that 1 trillion differential. 750 billion divided by 1,000 billion, which is what a trillion is, gives us 0.075. We multiply it by 100, we have our 75%. So you can tell what your MPC is just by looking at your MPS. Sometimes you're given the MPS and you have to figure out the MPC before you figure out how much is actually getting consumed. But that's all very simple math. Marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save equals 1 or 100%. You know, we have several problems there. You have several problems on your homework. You have several problems on the exercises. They might not be exactly this straightforward. We will look at, different angles of tackling them. But they're there, and I look forward to getting your exercises and going over them with you when I return them. So this is where we are as far as the MPC and the MPS. And as you can see, it is really, really a lot simpler than one imagines. Okay, guys, we are now on autonomous consumption. Always stop and look at what the words are saying to you. The word autonomous means independent. Well, if this is called independent consumption, what the heck is it independent of? it's independent of the level of real disposable income. Autonomous consumption are those necessary bills I was talking about. Think of the bills you have to pay. We read horror stories about people, for instance, who are doing fine until they become ill. They end up needing a lot of medical care, and that medical care creates so many bills for them that it eats away at their savings. It eats away at their future income that would ordinarily go to maybe buying food or paying for additional gas as gas prices go up, etc. That is debilitating for people because that is a must-pay bill. You have a bill that's coming every month you did not used to have before, and this bill is something you have to pay. What you cannot do is call the hospital and say, I don't have the money. Like, that doesn't work really. You know, saying, I got a pay cut, I got laid off. The bills keep coming, right? We can't really stop the electric bill, the cable bill, the gas bill, the car payment, the car insurance, the health insurance. Those bills are just going to come in. And that is our autonomous consumption, because that's consumption that you're doing independently of your income. Anytime you're spending money, that whether you have it or not, you spend it, it is autonomous consumption. Let's recall a little bit. Total expenditures is consumption plus investments plus government plus net exports. Okay, so here's the net exports. I had to move it. It was hiding here a little bit. So it's consumption plus investments plus government plus net exports, the one down here, right? I purposefully made consumption humongous. We're talking about the consumption expenditure. It's the C right here. I made it much bigger so you see it and it stands out in your mind. So we're talking about the consumption that is independent of real disposable income. So this is obviously affixed to the household sector because it's the household sector that owns the consumption expenditure. And we have it under this like wonderful, very storytelling, lovey-dovey kind of slide for you, because who doesn't love to consume? How important is consumption? Now, I will never say that how much you consume has anything to do with your happiness, but the level of consumption that we do can create comforts that reduce the stressors. So for me, it's all about reducing the stressor of finance, you know, taking away the things that worry you and give you stomach ache about, am I going to be able to pay this bill or that bill? And sometimes it really is difficult. If you're a parent and your kid needs to go on a field trip and the money for the field trip is difficult to come up with, imagine how hard that is, that your kid might have to stay behind when other kids get to go. Those things. So people sometimes push through them and they try to find a way to spend money they don't have. But consumption, it would be nice if you don't have to make those choices in life, and life, you know, isn't so very stressful. So this is where money comes in and is helpful in that sense. I would like to continue here a little bit with consumer price expectations can alter consumption. So we're discussing autonomous consumption, but let's talk about what can be in charge of that. What can really be in charge of that and help that is consumer price expectations. If you remember, future price expectations is actually a third variable, a non-price determinant for demand and for supply. This one is what the consumer thinks they're going to need to pay for something later. So it's going to affect their savings. And optimism and pessimism play a role as well. Studies show, for instance, that on gray, wet days, people tip less than on sunny, bright days. You might actually be more generous when you're on vacation than when you're not. That has to do with your optimism. I'm going to, come back to that in a minute. I'm going to circle back to it. There are non-interest rate determinants. Now, especially to classical economists, interest rate determinants are very important because they are price determinants. Keynes is coming to the non-price determinants. And the biggest non-price determinant is actually disposable income. So non-interest rate, remember, supply possesses non-price determinants and interest rate is a price. So this is a non-interest rate determinant because classicals also focus heavily on monetary policy. And this is one of the last things we will discuss together. And monetary policy is very much about prices and very much about interest rates. But Keynes says other third variables that aren't the price, in this case, that aren't the interest, the non-interest determinants, are very important, which really are the real disposable income. How much people consume has to do with how much disposable income they have. The more the disposable income, the more they consume. The more that they consume, the higher the profits for businesses. The more profitable businesses are, the more able they are to up that total production that translates into a bigger real GDP. The more they are able to create jobs, the more they are able to pay people adequately for those jobs, the more they are able to innovate and therefore create new industries and new jobs. And all that becomes an even bigger and healthier and stronger real GDP. But where does it all start? But from a Keynesian point of view, with real disposable income right here. Another non-interest rate determinant is consumer expectations. You do save for the purpose of spending. There is saving to retire, which we are going to spend in retirement, but the idea is 30, 40 years from now. Then there's like saving for college. Then there's saving for vacation, saving to buy a new car. And so Keynes is saying, look, two very important ones is how much you have in disposable income to begin with, and what are you anticipating your future expenses to be. And I know from me, I absolutely believe, and I tried to kind of, share some strategies with you before, you should only pay with yesterday's dollars. And the way you pay with yesterday's dollars is first you put money aside. There are exceptions, obviously having a mortgage. But what I don't want you to do is borrow money for your refrigerator, borrow money for your car, borrow money for your sofa, borrow money for your computer, borrow money for your phone. We see what was happening here? Everything is going to cost you a lot more than it needs to cost you, which prevents you from investing, from saving, and from actually affording the things that you are trying to buy. So remember, if you think of how things cost you in amount of time worked, you might find that you can live without some of the things you're looking to purchase, especially when we do our spring and fall cleanup and we find out every year we produce 2-3 bags or 2-3 boxes to give away to the Goodwill. Those are things we bought we should have never bought. That's what that actually is saying, right? And here's another tip. I love shoes. Not a surprise. Ladies often love shoes. But I have a rule. I only buy a new pair of shoes when I'm ready to give away a pair. So if I'm not ready to give away a pair, I clearly don't need a new pair of shoes. So this is how I let myself have a new pair of shoes. I select something I had. That way, the amount of space I have is all the amount of space I'm ever going to dedicate to shoes. That's it. This is my shoe rack. And if I need a new pair of shoes, that means I've actually worn down one, usually my sneakers. Yeah, I'm going to get a new pair of sneakers because the other ones are no longer good for my back and I need to get rid of them, or my knees, or whatever the case might be. And I hope this stuff helps you. Don't buy something new unless you're willing to give away something in its place. And if you're not ready to give away something, you don't really need that new thing. Okay, have a great one. I enjoyed you. I always enjoy you. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you in chapter 9. Bye-bye.